What's up, everybody? Thanks
Hey
for
guys.
waiting. Tariq, good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you as well.
Welcome to the community. How's everyone doing? Where's everyone coming from? I'm seeing a lot of distribution here. We got LA, Seattle. I saw some international. Right on, right on. Sweden, San Jose. Cool. All right. Well, we are here to talk about from Claude Code to Figma and back. Small niche topic that nobody's really talking about, but I'm glad we have Tariq here to help go through some of the basics. And I know we got a good spread of the community here. We got designers, we got developers. So this will be good to kind of go through some of the basics here and talk about use cases. But first, I'm Brett. I'm a designer advocate here at Figma. I am San Diego based, and I'm excited to be here today. And we have Tariq from Anthropic. Do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Thariq. I work on the Claude Code team. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out like how to use Claude Code with new tools and different partners. I think there's like always new things happening with agents, and I was really excited about the new MCP you guys put out, and I spent a bunch of time playing with that this week, and excited to talk about it.
Rad. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time with it the last couple of weeks too. It's been a new development, some new tools that we released there. So I'm excited to talk about how we've both been kind of playing around with it to see what happens. But first, a little housekeeping, just so everyone knows, this session will be recorded and emailed to you. Another thing, there is a chat, which we love seeing, and we love talking to you through the chat. If you have specific questions, please use the Q&A button. We do have some friends backstage in the live stream here who are going to be fielding some questions and making sure we get as many answered as possible, and then grabbing a few kind of key ones that we might want to talk through live here. And then the last one is be nice, everyone. We're all part of the same community. We do have our code of conduct for live streams, so please be kind to each other in the chat and elsewhere in the world. So a little bit of an agenda here. Intros, already did that. Cool. We're ahead of the game. We're going to go through, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Figma MCP server, kind of high level, why it exists, what it does, and then a little bit about some of the new developments with it. And then we're going to talk about skills and how skills can teach Claude Code things that we want to teach it. And then take a look at some demos and do some live tinkering with this kind of stuff. So, and then get into some questions. So first, I just want to like level set. I don't think this is news to anybody, but the product development process is getting condensed for many, many reasons. Roles are blending. What is a designer? What is a developer? What is a PM? All of these questions are coming up. And those are great questions. I think one of the more interesting angles is that workflows are blending, and that's because of AI tools like Claude Code and all the tools that you're kind of knee deep in every day, Tariq. And really, that's kind of like the cost to go from inspiration to prototype is going way down. And what that means is ideas can start from anywhere. I think previously, the design canvas was a great place for ideas to start because it was very low cost, and code was kind of hard to set up and scaffold out, and like kind of took some effort, and that gap is kind of changing. So we're seeing ideas start from anywhere. We're seeing people prompt into kind of inspiration to prototype. And so with that world, we're able to kind of go faster with these agents, but work does tend to potentially get a little siloed. And there are many ways around that, but we see Figma as a place for that divergent thinking and collaboration. And so, whether it's a durable file or just kind of like a sketch pad, you need that space to be creative and explore. I like to think of it as like spotlight versus lantern mode. When I'm going into like prototype and code, I'm spotlighting on the problem. I'm kind of building towards that. Lantern mode is where I can just kind of shine all the light in all the dark corners and see where the inspiration comes from. And so we're seeing kind of a source of truth shifting. But for me, I don't feel like it's not shifting to code. It's really shifting to like the system. And so we're talking about design, not just design system, but design, research, content, all this different input is really kind of the source of truth for how these ideas evolve. And when we talk about system, we're talking about context. And that's kind of where I see MCP coming in. For us, we're talking about design context. And so you think about pre-MCP days, we're talking about clearer handoffs, describing changes, manually sending screenshots back and forth. But like with the advent of MCP, Thariq, I'll throw this to you. Like, can you give us a sense of what the MCP is? Not necessarily at a technical level, but I just want to kind of demystify it a little bit for our group here so we can kind of get past that.
Yeah, I think basically MCPs allow, your apps to to communicate and talk to Claude Code. This can kind of go either way. I think one thing I like about the Figma MCP is that like Claude Code can both really act as a collaborator inside of it. It can, pull data, push data. But yeah, I think MCP is a great protocol for just like getting all of your data into your agents, because that's really what lets them be as smart as they can, right? And work across all these different contexts. And so, yeah, for design, so much of your context is in Figma.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So when we talk about round tripping from code to design and back again, like MCP is kind of the pipeline that lets that agent traverse those surfaces and keep its knowledge base, keep its context intact as it goes from surface to surface, which is critical.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. So talking about MCP, talking about moving fluidly between code and canvas, like we've been pursuing this workflow where it's like a single idea manipulated on multiple surfaces, right? Code is a material, UI is a material. Historically, they have kind of two different worlds that are different sets of requirements to function. So there's always this translation layer. But for many reasons, that translation requires kind of a lossless translation from code to canvas, which is why we need these MCP pipelines and these different capabilities. So MCP servers have different tools and capabilities built into them. Is that kind of a right way of describing it?
Yeah, I think so. There's actually like an interesting like research angle here too, where like the models tend to think in this very abstract space. So like, for example, one of the questions we get asked is like, what language does Claude think in, right? And it turns out that Claude thinks in like a sort of universal language and then translates to like English or German or Arabic or something. And it's kind of also true in code. So like when Claude is seeing your React code or something, and it's trying to convert it into the Figma like equivalent, it's doing that sort of translation, right? And so Claude like understands it at like an abstract level of like, oh, what is the app that you're trying to build? And then it's like putting these out into different languages, and it's surprisingly like really really good at that. Yeah.
Cool. So then that's when we're talking about like the read and write capabilities from the Figma server side. These are connection points that allow that abstract thought that the agent is thinking or the model is thinking to kind of input into the platform of Figma, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It reads your code and then just like, turns that into Figma code. Yeah.
Gotcha. So on the Figma MCP side, we do have these read capabilities and these write capabilities. The read capabilities we had for some time. This is allowing Claude Code and other agents to read design context and extract that from Figma to use and implement accurately. More recently, we've kind of been investing more in our write capabilities, and those are the writing to Figma. So prompting Claude Code can create and edit designs in Figma that are like linked to your system or code base because it has all that context as well. And so I want to dig in a little bit to the write portion because I think that's like the newer, kind of more exciting portion that we're going to be talking about. So initially we released the Generate Figma Design tool on our MCP, and that was like a notable first step. It was getting layers from a code base onto the Figma canvas. We knew it was kind of an initial phase. Community was quick to remind us that it was. We knew we needed to do more. So we saw that opportunity. And the rad part about working here at Figma is we do have an incredible community. And so we've seen how y'all have worked in the community. We've seen how y'all improve workflows. I know were a handful of kind of bridge plugins that were being developed to get us a little more further down that line of being able to bring in components and link the design system and tokens. But so we did see an opportunity to formalize this native solution. So now in beta, we have this use Figma tool in our MCP, and that uses our plugin API to directly manipulate and control objects in Figma, creating files, organizing frames, pages, managing variables, and even some FigJam connectivity that I know, Thariq, you and I have played around with the FigJam capability too, but it should be interesting to see how that goes. So being able to write to, it's one thing to give access to Figma, give agents access to Figma. It's another thing to like let them know how to use it or let them know how you want them to use it. And this is kind of where we see skills come in. Is that right? Can you give us like a high flyover of the power of skills when you're dealing with agentic workflows?
Yeah, I think skills basically just give your agent like specific information that maybe was sort of specialized before, right? And
Hmm.
so it allows you to like build on top of specialized knowledge. I think like for Figma, for example, I I'm not a designer exactly, so I like
Hmm.
sometimes I get lost in like what's a layer, what's a component, like what's like where do I put the variables and like how do I build a design system and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But one thing the skill can do is be like, okay, here's the Figma MCP. This is how you communicate with Figma. But then it's you can, for example, write me a skill that's like, okay, like when you're translating a component into Figma, this is how you sort of structure it, and why you might want to like create variables or things like that. And then when I'm using the Figma plugin and this skill, the Figma that I create will be like much more readable to you, right, and follow
Yeah.
those standards better. So, yeah.
That's such an interesting angle to like, that it's kind of closing the gap even more between like a developer communicating to designer and designer communicating to developer as well. Like the kind of shared overlap in knowledge is getting filled in by these skills, which is rad. And I love the way our team approached this and in that it's kind of a completely unopinionated access to Figma via this
Yeah.
you use Figma tool. We did build a few foundational skills, one of which is on screen now, this Figma use skill. And that kind of teaches the agent just generally how to interact with the plugin API. And so that's going to be kind of integral for this workflow. So we'll get into like resources on how people can kind of download and install that stuff. But it's not necessarily how you want to use Figma. That's where like developing your skills on top of that and creating skills for Claude on top of that foundational skill is going to be where this kind of extends into everybody's workflow, which is rad. And so that's where we have, I mean, I know it's in beta. It's going to do some things better than others. And so the great part about this is it's kind of unlocking platform level access. And so it's malleable, and just like plugins and other community resources that our community's been able to contribute. This is now a new artifact that y'all can explore and build and contribute to our kind of growing list of community skills that we have. And we'll get into more about kind of creating skills in a minute. But I do want to get into a little bit of the demo stuff. I'm going to pass it over to you, Thariq, to kind of share some of the stuff you've been able to kind of crash course on over the last week or so. I want to give everyone a sense of like what this is, what it feels like to use it, maybe a little bit of like how to get it up and running. I think would be beneficial. So yeah, let's see what you got.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, yeah, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna talk over this sample app I made, which is like a recipe cookbook app that is built in the Anthropic design system,
Mhm.
right? And I think basically what we are, I use Cloud Code to help build this, but I do want to iterate kind of on the design with you. I have a lot of these components. But I think that especially when we're thinking about new features like meal planner, shopping list, etc., like how does that look? How do I, I messed around with this and I think it looks kind of ugly now. Yeah, that's our goal is to like collaborate here. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that first off, we're going to be using, a mix of Terminal and Figma. And so,
Mm.
uh, if you're not familiar with Terminal, I think it is like, it can be intimidating, I think, at first, but it's really like, um, quite simple. I won't go into a full terminal tutorial here, but
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah.
I think definitely give it a shot. We also have Cloud Code Desktop, which is a desktop
Mm.
version if you're like, less comfortable with terminal. But to get started, you install the Figma plugin like this, right? And then it's Cloud plugin install Figma. I've already installed it, so I'm not going to run it here.
Okay.
But then I think an important thing to note is that you have to like make sure it's authenticated. So you go to /Figma /MCP, and you can see here that like Figma is connected, right? So
Mhm.
this is connected to my Figma account. Um, And so, yeah, I think that's the start of it. But yeah, what I've done now is I've started Claude Code in my code, right? So like I've got
Yeah.
this recipe box folder, I've got it in my code. And what I think would be fun is we could sort of collaborate on this card component, right? And
Mhm.
so I've got this in code, and now I'm going to prompt Claude Code, and we've got a shared Figma as well. So I'm just going to copy this link, right? Then I'll say
Yep.
like, can you create this the card component in Figma using the Figma MCP. Here is the link to my Figma. You don't have to usually say Figma MCP, but I just like, live
Mhm.
demo, I like to be as clear as
Sure.
possible, make it an adjustable component, right? So I'm going
Okay.
to ask Claude Code to go ahead and do that.
Mhm.
And while it's doing that, yeah, it's loading the skill. I think there is, uh, yeah, there is other, like we talked about skills, and so I do want to,
Yeah.
I might like multitask a little bit here, trying to switch between things.
Sure.
Um, what if I want to create a skill that will, like what's a good starting skill as a designer, right? And I
Mhm.
think one of them is like, how do you think about your design system, right?
Mhm.
Um, a great thing about Claude Code and skills are that these skills are um, basically something that you can you can ask Claude Code to create, right? So one of the prompts I like to do is we've got a skill creator installed, but you can just ask Claude Code like I want to make a skill that describes my design system.
Mhm.
um, you can interview me in depth using the Ask User Question tool. This is sort of like a prompt I'll share later as well,
Sure.
about it and what detail to have. So this is like an interesting way of like starting out with the skill. But
Mhm.
while we do that, we'll let Figma and
Yeah.
Cloud
Yeah.
do that. But yeah, so I think like we're going to um, have Figma go ahead and try and make these components for us.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So
anything
so
yeah.
yeah, real quick, we covered a lot of ground there. I just want to kind
Yeah.
of like recap a little bit and make sure I'm like grokking everything, and we can kind of go from there. So in that
Yeah.
first terminal window, when we did that initial plugin install, when we ran
Yes.
that one command, which we have available, we have resources, and people can look that up and get that.
Yes.
That is initiating the MCP connection and installing these foundational skills that we talked about in one shot. And
That's right.
is that correct? Okay, so
Mhm.
then you can go in, start your Claude session, hit /MCP. You should see it. You may need to authenticate your Figma instance or what have you. But all
Yep.
of that should be like Claude kind of handles all of that installation for you with just that command.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And then so you're in, and if anybody's not familiar with Terminal, you're now like you're in that local repo of your recipe box. You're in that folder on your computer, and you're running this Claude session to run these commands.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
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 Cool. Um, cool. So as we see this, I think this is really important to like see that terminal running, because I think
Yeah.
like a lot of designers are not super familiar with that. It's good that you called out the desktop app, and the desktop app capabilities are equal to running Claude Code in terminal. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe hard to say equal with broad strokes, maybe, but like you
Yeah.
can do a lot of the same things there, I'm assuming.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So, uh, yeah, exactly. It is just it's the same skills. You can it won't be a terminal, so it looks more like a
Yeah.
regular app. But yeah,
Hmm.
and I've like split out this so we can see Claude working at the same time. But maybe I'll move it out for a bit and then come back. But
Okay.
yeah,
And this is okay. So this is a good moment too, because when I was like playing around with this and like running, making Cloud Code do its thing, sending these agents out to like build things in Figma, and I was like sitting there and like watching, and like we're sitting here on a live stream, like watching the terminal run, and it's like, oh gosh, that's like,
yeah,
but like in a normal workflow, you wouldn't necessarily be doing that. You'd set it, you'd be doing what we're doing. You'd set it to run, it would go, you could monitor it, but then that frees you up to kind of focus on other things like running another agent or doing more deep design work. And so that's kind of a key thing to remember. As I was like playing around with this, I was like, well, I really could probably build this component myself in Figma. That's not the point, right? The point is that you can kind of like delegate these things while you keep your focus elsewhere, which is nice.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think also, this collaboration between like being an engineer and a designer, right? Like where I don't necessarily know, how to create Figma components in depth, and maybe we can show some of like the other prompts while we wait for Claude. So here's an example thing that I did, right, where I started out with this like sketch. Obviously, you wouldn't do this. You're
well, maybe, I don't know. I'd have my process. Right? I might paper and pen. So,
but I then asked Claude with this prompt, like, okay, flesh out this sketch and turn it into something in our design system along with a bunch of components. And looked at the recipe box code, right, and then created this, right. And now I can sort of like, as an engineer, be like, okay, like, do I want to toggle this card? Looks good. What if I add an aisle group here, right? And I can sort of like mess around and edit with Figma, which is like, and I can get you in it as well, right? Which is like the really exciting thing where I feel like before the Figma MCP, as an engineer, I'd just be sort of like asking Claude, like, hey, can you like make it look good, and like, like this looks kind of ugly. So this is like one of the prompts we did, right? And then well, let's let Figma run. Okay, so this is one of the prompts we did. And you can see here are some of the cards we've got now, right? We like we'll be able to collaborate on this, and let's check in on Claude here. And so this is the card component we've got. I think something to call out. Here's like this is what the card looks like. This is what Claude's made. Okay, cool. It's like consistently messed up like this thing here, right? The circles, and then we've got no images. I think images are still like we're still working on that with the right.
Yep. Image generation or image upload via MCP is something that's in the works now, and it's a good thing to point out. I mean, this is a beta tool, and like it does a pretty good job though. I mean, I'm looking at this here, and I'm in this file with you. It created this recipe card. There's some visual things to clean up, which are easy enough to do. I don't know, like just kind of shrink that down. But the notable thing is that it created it as a component, and it created it with variants, and it knew that it had all these variants, and so you can drag this out and see. Like if you click on that I just dragged out, and you see on that right panel, it's got all of the properties. It's got the category, the title, the subtitle, time, servings, difficulty, all these toggles, these Boolean toggles. It built all of that from the code base and generated that and constructed that and architected it correctly in Figma, which was a big gap before that we didn't necessarily have. And so it speeds up this process immensely. Like now as a designer, I go in, I know the structure of the dev component, and I can go in and just kind of, tweak what I need to. Like I'm going to go ahead and make sure all of these are, what was it? 30 height, or maybe it should be hugging height. Yeah, there you go. Hug height. So I'm making these tweaks. And then maybe let's say I want the rating. These are like minimal tweaks that like, sure, you could potentially do this in CSS. Like we're not necessarily doing anything dramatic here, but I just wanted to kind of prove that point so that, okay, so now we've made some tweaks to the card component. Let's take this collaboration a little bit further, right? Like how do we get this back into our code base?
So definitely, like I think the collaboration is like a really good thing to point out also, where we have a pretty limited time in this demo, so we can't do too much. But I think this idea of like Claude Code is a very single player experience, and I think adding Figma to it enables us to like sort of collaborate in this like live way, right? And we could play around, add comments, like start building screens together. But I think like basically let's say now like I've added and modified the card component in this Figma screen, in this Figma. Can you update the component in code to match? Okay, so yeah, let's let Claude run. And yeah, I think, again, like this is one of those things where, especially as an engineer, like one of the things that I used to run into a lot was like just missing some of the details in the like implemented designs, right? And
Sure.
I think being able to say like, oh, okay, like yeah, like Claude will help me sort of make that translation really solid. So while this runs, we can also like I can keep showing like some of these. Like I have a few other prompts, or is there? Would you prefer to talk about the about this flow more?
We can. I mean, I've got some examples I can share too, but let's check on the progress of that. I getting it back into code seemed to not always take too long, so I'm wondering if we're going to get that.
Yeah, I think it might take a bit of time because
Okay.
actually, let me hold on. Let me start from. Okay, cool. I updated the card component in the Figma. Just want to give it as much context. Can you update it in code as well? Okay. Yeah, so we'll let that run. Yeah, let me show you some of the other prompts maybe we've tried.
So, yeah, you had another one over here talking about the marketing poster, which was interesting.
Yeah, this was something where I really like doing, right? So I just prompted Claude Code like, hey, can you create a marketing poster for this app in our style in this Figma? You give it a link. And yeah, like, this is one of those things where a lot of times with Claude Code, it's really good at this like first pass, right? I'm sure there's a lot to improve here, but now it's editable and tweakable, and I can like even send this to my marketing team and just be like, hey, here's like a first pass, or here's like something I have in inspiration. And so you can do it, yeah, not just for like UI, but you can also do it for marketing, for graphic design and things like that. So thought that was great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. It's the blank canvas problem. But it's the same conversation when we talk about like different cross-functional partners kind of sharing these artifacts, and it's like, okay, well, this is great because now it gives us something to talk through. Like, why did you want to prompt this? What are you trying to communicate with this design? And like, as a designer, I can absorb that and like add my craft to it and make sure that like it gets to the point where it needs to get for all of us, so it's just a cool connection point.
We can like collaborate on it as well. Yeah. So yeah, and you can see the Claude Code's working. So it's like picked up your changes, right? You change the font size, and the body section has moved up, and so now it's like it's doing the changes itself.
The code, yeah.
And so yeah, here we go. Yeah, so we've matched it. We've got the font is probably too big, but
yeah.
Now we've got we moved around the stars and things like that. So yeah, and of course, like we chose a very trivial example, right? But we could have been like, oh, let's make a shopping list from scratch and start mocking it out and things like that. So yeah.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, I'd love to kind of show a couple examples on my end that I was playing with, and get your take on them. So I have a kind of a different product, and I'm hoping our screen share switches over to my screen here. Yeah. Here we go. So we have this Astra product that we've kind of used in a couple of our demos, but I basically just built this login screen that has a couple different states. Forgot password. It's got an SSO sign-on, a sign-up screen, and then if I kind of continue logging in, we have this kind of dashboard view, right? And there's a couple scenarios I wanted to play around with this, and I have like a storybook instance that shows all the components that I have in this. And the one that I wanted to point out is this kind of this featured video card, right? Like I'm imagining that like I'm either building this myself as like kind of a weekend coder, design engineer, what have you, or I have a developer partner who's building this, and we identified that we kind of needed this featured card, and so we kind of just prompted it or coded it really into existence here, but we wanted to fine tune the UI of it. And so over here, I'm not going to do it live like you were doing, but I had this prompt where I just said, build me the featured item card component on this Figma page. And I linked to this specific Figma page, and it built this. This is very similar to what we just saw it do with the card example. But now I have the ability to kind of go through and like explore the space a little bit more. And I wanted to point this out because I don't claim that all of these are good. In fact, some of them are probably bad, but like that's kind of the point, right? Now I have this Figma canvas where I can explore these spaces, and I can just kind of pick the one that I want to go with and feed it back through Claude Code to my code base. And I built this kind of whole set of components in this file using that flow. I basically just told Claude to like build all these components, and it did a really rad job with it. Another thing that I did was I exploded the state of the login flow. I basically said generate design frames in this Figma file for each state of the login flow, and it did that. I mean, it went through the logic in the code side, and it generated all of these screens. And so now I have like, okay, if I have an app that has a legacy flow that isn't well documented in Figma, but need to do the design work to iterate and enhance, I can run this and like have it generate this. And now I have these pieces that I can play with. There are some gaps for sure where it kind of misaligned some things. But what's cool is that it actually generated, and I didn't necessarily prompt this, but it generated this kind of fidelity notes on Canvas where it talked about what it did, talked about what components it linked to, talked about what it had to manually rebuild because there was no component in the library that this file was attached to, which was rad. And then it documented known issues where it would require manual cleanup. So some of those things that I showed you, like this piece not like being kind of hidden. I think there was another thing up here where there was this like large gap here. It kind of annotated those and told me that I'd probably need to go in and manually clean those up. And I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I'm curious from your side, like, why do you think it like did that instead of just cleaning it up itself? Is it like it doesn't feel like a limitation. It feels very smart that it like identified those things and documented them. So like, is there anything in the model that you can tell me why it decided to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like we always say models are kind of organic, you know what I mean? And so we're never like, oh, hey, there's like a condition where if Brett from Figma says that, right? Like it's very much like I think especially for Claude, we want Claude to be very collaborative. We want it to sort of recognize when it should take its own initiative and when it should sort of like ask you, right? And it's like a tricky balance to get because like sometimes even between like an individual employee or like person you're working with, like they might fall differently on that spectrum. So I think like here Claude is, asked to like sort of get your approval and do this. But it's like something we're always tweaking, but I think generally I've been like very pleasantly surprised. And you can always sort of give Claude guidance. You can sometimes say like, oh, hey, like ask me questions or like, interview me is something I like to say. Or you can be like, just run with it, like use your taste or something is something I like to tell Claude as well. If I just wanted to like go ahead and do something.
Go with it. Yeah. I've noticed that whether it's this approach or like in terminal, I've been kind of like you said, pleasantly surprised when it like asks me how it wants me to proceed. And I'm like, oh, cool. We're collaborating here. It's not just like blindly going. So you kind of touched on it, but like, is there a way to kind of tune it, like a recommended way to say like, hey, if I want it to be a little more risky in its design decision making, right? Like stray from the kind of typical safe realm if I wanted to push further. Is there a way to do that? Like, would that be through? That's not skills, right? That's different.
Well, I think you can make like, for example, a brainstorming skill, and I think that would be like an interesting thing to like sort of broadly do. I think that like overall it really is prompting, right? And so and prompting, but it's just thinking of Claude as a collaborator, but like giving it as much detail as you want, so it doesn't need to like infer your intent too much, right? So like I think oftentimes when I see people using agents, they sort of start with the very basic prompt, like okay, yeah, like implement like make this look prettier or like make this design work or something, right? And then I think that like the more ambiguity you can resolve, or even just being like, hey, like I don't really know what I have in my head, right? Like
Mhm.
interview me, ask me questions, or like I want to see different possibilities, right? Like implement this design 8 different ways, right?
Mhm.
I think one of the great things about sort of using Cloud Code and agents is like that you have, like you said, this like very cheap and rich exploration space. So
Yeah.
oftentimes I'm asking Claude to try a bunch of different things and then choosing one and
Mhm.
iterating on it. So
Mhm.
um, yeah, I think there's no hard and fast rules. It's really just like talking to Claude, but trying to be more specific is always better. Like
Sure.
treating it like giving it freedom, but being specific in what you want, or even being honest if you don't know what you want.
Very cool. Um, I want to keep moving through. I want to
Yeah.
show a couple more examples where I want to illustrate thinking beyond just like generate designs for me in Figma, because I feel like that's kind of like the first thing that designers maybe go to when you talk about agentic workflows. But there's a
Yep.
couple other examples that I wanted to point out where, like this one, I basically asked it to compare the difference between the Figma
Mhm.
frame and the login screen of my app and annotate those differences. And it basically, this was the design frame that I gave it, and then it generated this screen, this frame, which is as built in code, and annotated the differences and talked about the discrepancies between the two, and even categorized them as like high, medium, or low, risk or alert, right? And then talked about specifically about component overrides that it found in components that were connected to my library where things had been overridden, which was rad. And then I took it a step further. I wanted to see if it could drop comments on that screen,
Oh yeah.
where it found it, and it did that. Now this is actually using our REST API, not to confuse things, but our
Oh.
comment generation is through our REST API. But
Hmm.
why I point that out is because I maybe I should have known that, but I didn't necessarily know that. But as I was working with Claude, I said, "Hey, drop comments in," and it said, "Cool, I can do that, but it's part of this, which means I need a personal access token from your Figma
Yeah.
admin," which I then went around and did. So it's just another example of kind of Claude Code as a collaborator and the agent like knowing what it needs to do more so than I do, and kind of just prompting me to like help it do its thing. So this is a really cool use case that I found. One other one that I wanted to point out, and then we can kind of talk a little more about skills if you're down.
Sure.
But I basically I had a local folder of JSON files that were contract files for my variable set. It documented all my variables, what they were for, and their naming and everything like that. And so in that local folder, I asked Claude to generate my variables in this Figma file based on the JSON files in the current directory. And if I open up the variables panel, it did it. But it basically made a collection per file, which is not necessarily how I wanted it, right? We have this dark mode and light mode as different collections, where in Figma, we do have the concept of modes in your variable set. And so I wanted to point that out because we do have a community skill called CC Figma tokens. And so I ran that exact same prompt using that skill.
Nice.
And then the variables came out like this, which is a much more expected or a much more preferable output. So it analyzed those tokens, it followed that skill, and it generated all the modes properly. And so I
Yeah.
think I wanted to share that because that's kind of like, to me, a very clear example of the power of a skill, when
Hmm.
you're talking about kind of teaching it how to use the platform in the way that you want to use it.
Yeah.
And so with that lovely segue, I'd love to toss to you about skills. And like, I know we talked a little bit about it. You talked about how you can essentially ask Claude to create skills yourself. But from your perspective, what, as designers or developers even go through their workflow and figure out how they can implement this kind of agentic version in certain places, what are the moments that make sense to think about creating skills around?
Yeah. I think that there's a pretty wide like categorization of skills, right? And I
Okay.
think I want to like I think that like the way for me to think about it conceptually is that like it used to be that there were specific things you could build on top of, which were like systems, right? Like you could build on
Mhm.
top of like your code system or your design system. Like you create a design system and then you share it. But there was a lot that couldn't be captured within a design system, or couldn't
Mhm.
be captured inside of code.
Mhm.
And then you just need like these individual people to sort of like own that, right? Or like the
Sure.
knowledge that lives inside of their head. I think skills are a way of like sort of being able to build on top of each other's knowledge in interesting ways, right? And so
Mhm.
someone might know, yeah, how to use variables. I think that's great.
Mhm.
And I think then like yeah, how would you think about it? I think some examples of skills are, yeah, like how do you think about your design system?
Hmm.
I think you might also want to create skills that verify that your design was well implemented, right? And I think this is
Hmm.
like a good. I think if you're a designer, you might want to work with an engineer closely to be like, hey, can we create some skills so
Hmm.
that like when you're working in design, it's closer to like what our expectations are, right? And so like there are all these tools that like you can do like a mix of like you can take screenshots, you can take like do DOM manipulations, you can do box sizing, like all of
Hmm.
these like additional information you can give Claude to like maybe verify your design, right?
Hmm.
And I think there's also just like one of the funny things that we've seen is that like the most popular skill in is the front end design skill, and
Hmm.
this was actually like what actually I think one of our engineers who worked very closely with Figma,
Hmm.
was like, okay, I'm gonna write a skill that shows has like takes all of my knowledge of how to make Claude better at design and write it down, and it's like
Hmm.
maybe a couple paragraphs. It's like online,
Hmm.
but it just like drastically changes how Claude like design stuff. And I think there is
Hmm.
like versions of that skill for your particular taste in design as well. So
Yeah. And
yeah.
you don't have to like explicitly evoke these skills, right? Claude will find them and use them when it deems appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a mix. Like, I think if you really know you want them, it's worth
Yeah.
just saying it. I think this is
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
those examples of like being specific,
Hmm.
like the less Claude needs to infer from your intent, the better.
Hmm.
But yeah, like it will also try and like infer as well. Um, I think it doesn't always do 100%. Like, there are some times where I wish it had invoked a skill.
Uh-huh.
But like the models get better and better at it. And
Yeah.
yeah, the most reliable way is just to ask it to use the skill too.
Gotcha. And I think one more thing, and then I think we'll get into some of the questions that we may have been sourcing. But
Yeah.
tell me if this is like the right line of thinking too, because I know when I was working on some skills, like I kind of tried to make them. I started realizing like, hey, maybe I should make these a little more like smaller in size that
Mm,
can then be kind of combined with other skills, right? Like if
mm,
if if you tell Claude to do a specific task, it may go through that and realize, oh, I can use this skill for this small piece and then this one for this piece, and it can kind of combine them and use them where it needs to. Like you said, like sometimes you want to evoke it explicitly, but sometimes maybe you kind of just hope that it finds the right skill. Is
yep.
that the right line of thinking? Like kind of smaller composable skills more than just like big skills?
I think that they can be both. I think
Okay.
that
Yeah.
like, like in the same way that you could imagine design systems that are like made of tons of different components versus
Sure.
design systems that have like, maybe larger components like glued together, right? Or having
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
mixture of them. Um, yeah, I think that like this is one of those things where I'm hesitant to be too prescriptive because I think that like
That's
the
fair. Yeah.
important thing is to like try it out and see what works for like your particular like workflow. But
Mhm.
yeah, I do like layering skills on top of each other and referencing skills.
Mhm.
I think that's a nice way of um, like yeah, giving like letting Claude mix and match knowledge basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Rad. Well, you down to get into some questions real quick? I know we
Yeah.
have like
Of course.
maybe 15 minutes left. We'll see how many we can get through.
Cool.
We've got a couple. How do you imagine agentic workflows benefiting from opening up access to tools like Figma? I can give my thoughts and then toss it over to you. But
Cool.
I think honestly, I think things are going to get a lot more creative. I think
Mm,
it's beyond just like writing to the canvas, like I was talking about. Like it's syncing, it's ops, it's auditing, it's organizing, it's kind of linting things. Like there's a lot of
yep.
leverage to there for like some high energy, low efficiency tasks, as I like to call them. Um,
Mm,
and I just think it's going to like kind of rip away some of the artifice of the tooling, and it's going to allow me to run an agent or run multiple agents to do some of the like kind of tooling work, and that allows me to kind of focus deeper in the creative stuff. And that's what I'm kind of hoping will happen. That's what I see that will happen with the ability to kind of run agents on the canvas. Because that's some of the more powerful use cases that I stumbled into was not necessarily designing for me or anything like that, but all of the kind of stuff surrounding that allows me to kind of multitask those out to agents or delegate that, and then like focus in on the deep creative work. But curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think two things. Like one, like I said, Claude Code is like a single player experience right now. I think like, getting in access from things like Figma, like, I use like Notion and Slack and as well, places like that where you're like collaborating with people, I think is really, really important, right? And I think that this is like, like, if like I'm working with a designer, I'm working with them in Figma. So I think that lets Claude be more like a collaborator overall. I think on your sense of like, yeah, things are being more creative. I think that's right. Like, I think that, the way that you and I are going to use the Figma MCP is going to be very, very different, I think, because I am not a designer, right? And so like, I think for me, it's like sort of raising the bar of like, of how I can sort of visualize something in my head and try and like bring it to life, right? And I think for you it's like, yeah, how do you use it to like really like help your craft, right? And I think that like there's a lot more depth there, in the same way that like as an engineer, I'm going to use it differently, Claude Code differently than you will, right? And I think the best engineers I think are like doing like 10% of what Claude Code is doing is writing code, and 90% of it is like exploration, creating artifacts, like helping do the like, the busy work or things that are like, not as useful. So I think there's going to be a lot more creativity.
That's cool. That was going to be one of my questions to you that we didn't get to. But like, what can designers learn from developers who have been working with these agentic workflows more? And I think you kind of just hit it a little bit, but you also touched on it earlier, where my encouragement to designers out there is like, if you're working with developers, like collaborate on how to use these tools together, and like you'll learn from them and you can kind of bounce ideas off of each other. So, okay, this is a long one. How can Claude adhere to coding standards in large existing project, following the same guidelines developers follow, building UI consistently, maintaining context over long sessions, and avoiding hallucinations? This feels like teed up for you more than me. So
sure. Yeah. I mean, I think broadly this is, kind of a mix of skills and prompting and, things like that. I think that the way I think about it is that your best engineers should be creating these like the scaffolding for Claude Code so that more people can start using it well. And so, we've shared, content on developers. Like I wrote an article on skills and things about how to like sort of create these systems. And so I think it's a set of systems like skills, verification, like good CI/CD, like all of these things. But at a high level, I think as a designer, ideally your developers have done the work there so that when you're working in your code, it's following the guidelines.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's keep cruising. How can I make sure Claude is using a specific skill? And if my output isn't what I expected, what should I do? We kind of hit on this a little bit as far as like make sure it's using a specific skill. If you know that skill is something you wanted to execute on, you can explicitly call it out. But the follow-up is kind of interesting. Like if the output isn't what I expected, what should I do? I mean, I've found in creating skills and using skills that if that's the case, I generally just talk to Claude and say, hey, this was off. Can we do it a different way and bake that into the skill and revise the skill? That's kind of the
I think what we say is like have a gotcha section in your skill. You know what I mean? And
cool.
Like add a list of gotchas. So like, when we were doing the Figma MCP earlier, it had like set the badge like a little bit too round, you know what I mean? Or like it was a circle instead. And so maybe there's something there where Claude like viewed that as like a circle instead of an ellipse, or I'm not sure what, right? But like you might try and like if you can sort of like empathize with Claude a little bit and be like, okay, like it seems like you're doing this thing consistently, here's a pattern, add it as a gotcha, but definitely thinking about like reading the outputs, trying to understand what the model is doing, and if it's getting confused, like try and understand why.
Cool. Talk a little bit more about how PM, design, and eng are supposed to work in this new world. What has been working for Figma and Anthropic pain points? This is a great question. I mean, I think that the workflows are changing. I kind of jokingly said this the other day, but if there's one thing I've learned in the last 6, 7, 8 months, is that like workarounds are kind of the new workflows. And I don't say that disparagingly. I mean, like everyone's kind of figuring out how to stitch this stuff together and get the good results. And I think that's the exciting part, is that all of these different functions are kind of finding these tools and figuring out points of connection. So, anybody who says they know exactly how these three functions are supposed to work in this new world is kind of lying, I think, because it's always changing. But the key thing is, like, I think the way you're supposed to do it is collaboratively, and like communicate and find out what pieces are beneficial to y'all in your workflows, and go from there and kind of build systems around that using these agentic workflows or traditional workflows or whatever. But the thing that the fact that this is all opening up from a platform perspective with MCP and all these connective tissue throughout these different toolings is just exciting, and kind of makes it a little more flexible. So, yeah, I mean, it does create speed, and it does create a lot of like potential thrash if things aren't like lined up perfectly. But yeah, I don't know if you have a take on that from the Anthropic side.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely rethinking first principles. I think it's like two things. Like one, people are getting more horizontal, and so like I think instead of like talking about things, it's better to like do some version of it, right? So like if like our designers have an idea, they'll often make a PR, or they'll make like a prototype or something, even though they know that it's probably not implemented in the way that they think it is. Like, it's good to know the constraints. For example, Claude Code is a terminal UI, and terminal UI constraints are very, very different, like extremely unintuitive. And so it used to be kind of like, like designers would have a thing and be like, oh, here's like, can we add like 2 pixels of padding here? And you can't, like in the terminal, you can't have that, right?
Yeah.
But now they can sort of like understand that constraint itself, right? And so creating PRs and like doing that in a way that like helps sort of describe what you're looking for. I think if you're a designer or PM is really interesting. And as an engineer, things like the Figma MCP, I think the stuff that I can make can look better by default, is kind of the goal, right? And there's not always a lot of time for, having a designer on every single like thing, especially stuff that's like as simple as like a marketing like asset that's like kind of posted somewhere or something, right? So I think like everyone's like moving more horizontally, learning from each other. I think in really exciting and fun ways, versus being blocked. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also, I see a definite value in, sure, there's like a skill set thing, like learning these new tools and everything. But more than that, I think there's a mindset shift that I see very valuable to kind of be curious about these new workflows and tools. And like we said, collaborate. Like you kind of touched on it before. As a designer, if I can write a skill for Claude that will help a PM do something that will better land in my language, you know what I mean? Like, hey, I've seen you doing this. Like, I generated the skill for you to help like do that. And you find those leverage points in the workflows, and that just kind of flywheels in your overall workflow, and you start to kind of get momentum in different areas. So mindset shift for sure.
Totally.
Let's do a couple more. I know we have maybe a little over 5 minutes, but how do you think about what an agent needs to know versus putting everything in the context window? I think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'll go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that giving it tools is very useful. So like, if you're using in Figma and like, let's say some of your information is in Slack, giving it Slack is very useful. I think that like putting it in the context window is not the right way to think about things. I think it's like being specific in your request, and I think that there are lots of times, the majority of times, where we're not very specific, I think. And that's usually when I see the agents sort of get tripped up, and so the more specific you can be, the better. I think one of the great things about Figma actually is like it's a place for resolving ambiguity a little bit. Like it can be like, oh, hey, create this design, and then you're like, oh no, this looks kind of ugly. Instead of like asking Claude to make it better, I'm just like, okay, let me tweak this, move this around, edit it, and now I've like fixed the ambiguity, or like resolved that, and now I can give the agent the full details. So
yeah, make it better generally is not
my
experience. I've done that. I was going to say something, but I forgot about it. Oh well. I was going to say, like, if you could maybe be a little more specific, rather, about specific prompts, because I feel like at times I try and maybe this is different than specificity, but I've tried to give models like more constraints to try and guide it.
Yeah.
And that almost ends up being worse sometimes, because I think I've equated it to like a angsty teenager where you tell it exactly what you want it to do, and it's going to be like, no, that's not the best way to do it, and try and do it a different way. How do you balance like getting very specific with what you want and letting the model kind of reason the way that it needs to reason to be successful?
Yeah, this is like not, I'd say a skill, like I think it's sort of like,
Okay.
if someone's asking me like how to be great at prompting, it's kind of like how do I be good at writing or at speaking or something, you know what I mean? Like there's like a huge amount of like degrees of freedom, like a huge amount of like different, like even one word or two words can change like an entire output, right? And like I was working with a friend over this weekend who would like was a non-technical person using Claude Code, and I'd watch them and I'd be like, oh, let's just add like this word here, or like just move this one thing around, like, and it would like completely change the outputs, right? And so this is something I'm trying to work on, is like more guides on prompting. But I'd say the thing is just be curious, I think, and be like, okay, like, yeah, the model's not doing this in this way. Why, right? Like, is it not smart enough? Did I not give enough context? And yeah, each model is also kind of different, right? Which is also, like both between different providers and different generations. And so this is one of the things about AI. Like, yes, there's so much automation to do, but there's so much more learning to do as well, of like how to use these tools really well. They evolve very quickly. So
yeah, right on. We're running tight on time. What just happened there? I just lost my place. But well, I think since we're low on time anyway, I want to kind of jump to the end here. Let me see if I can find my slides again. Here we are. So the one thing I wanted to get to make sure we hit is like, what can people do like right now? Like, what is the best kind of next step for anyone like starting out with this stuff, or maybe they're trying to take it to the next level? Like, what can people do right now, from your opinion?
Yeah, I think that if you're a designer, I would just like either try and get started yourself or work with someone who knows how to use Cloud Code, and be like, like there are probably engineers on your team being like who are using it quite well, right? Or like, and I think I've only seen people get really excited to be like, hey, yeah, let's do it together, let's work, right? And so I think like, yeah, use Cloud Code Desktop, which is like, more of the UI version. I think like on a company level, sort of like freeing people up to be able to like try some of these explorations is really useful. Like, if you're just sort of like focused on a specific project, you're like, I know what I need to do for this project. Maybe you have less room for exploration versus like we've seen a lot of great companies do like hackathons and sort of like work greenfield projects. So yeah, just being curious and open with the tools, talking to people who might know more information. Obviously online, there's a lot of information too. So
yeah. That's great. I kind of echo that. Like, be curious, try these tools out, check out some of the resources we have. I'll flip over to this screen here. We do have resources on the different Figma MCP our clients that we are connecting to all the different MCPs that we have available, and exploring the communities, the community skills that we do have. So like, go into there, figure out how to install this stuff, start playing with it, because then you're going to start to understand how you can implement it and find those moments, and then get really diligent with where you want to implement it. I think there are places that it makes a lot of sense for different people, and be efficient with your token spend, right? Like, I think we talked about it, like the Figma canvas is great because it's cheap exploration where you can option drag and duplicate and copy and explore. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is because, you don't have to spend the tokens to do it. And B, I think like, when you associate a cost to something, it becomes precious. And I think it's harder to throw that away. And so that's why I think like knowing when to use the agentic workflow and when to use kind of more traditional workflows is a really important kind of skill for designers to learn, and figure out on their own, because it's going to be different for everybody. Someone might want to lean more into it. Someone might want to kind of preserve some of that stuff on the exploration side. So that would be my advice to everyone. Cool. Well, Thariq, thank you so much for the time, dude. This is a meaty topic. I know we brushed through a lot real fast. So hopefully everyone learned something from it and is excited to kind of play around with it. This is kind of a big moment for our, collaboration between Claude Code and Figma. So I'm stoked to be able to bring that to everyone here. Be sure to check out future live streams, figma.com/events. Specifically on April 2nd, our developer advocate here, Ricardo, is hosting a developing products in the age of AI in an EMEA-friendly time. So I would be sure to check that out. And as always, if you have a suggestion or an idea, our community team here at Figma is fantastic. Email community@figma.com. Let us know what you want to hear. So thank you. Find us both on X or wherever you'll find us, and reach out if you want to learn more. But thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Larry.
Okay.